get to this first story because I got to tell you, I do not understand what Christopher Wray is doing. I mean, if Donald Trump is going to break precedent twice, first by firing first FBI director when he went in, and Comey, and now doing it again, I would make him do it. I would make him once again breach protocol.
Right.
But Wray didn't do that.
No, that's the big story we start with this morning. The announcement from FBI Director Chris Wray that he will resign from his position before President-elect Trump takes office in January. Here is what he told FBI employees at a town hall yesterday.
After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the Bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. And in my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray while reinforcing the values and principles that are so important in how we do our work.
The decision comes as Trump vows to replace Wray after the inauguration, selecting loyalist Kash Patel to take Wray's job.
Patel, of course, promised last December, about a year ago, that he would be part of the next Trump administration and go out and arrest journalists and either go after them civilly or go after them criminally. He also said he would shut down the FBI building on day one and turn it into a museum for the deep state.
Trump has signaled he would likely fire Wray upon taking office if Wray did not leave first. Trump has accused Wray, without evidence, of allowing his role to be politically weaponized by the Biden Justice Department. A senior FBI official tells NBC News the current plan is for Wray to stay on as director until January 20th, when the new administration takes over. At that point, FBI Deputy Director Paul Abate will be named acting director and will stay in that position until a new director is confirmed. Wray's resignation means he will not serve out the 10-year term to which he was nominated by then President Trump in 2017.
All right, so David, we either have 10-year terms or we don't have 10-year terms, and it seems with Donald Trump we don't have 10-year terms. Are you surprised that Wray just backed down and didn't make it more difficult for Donald Trump?
Ken Delanian, who covers the Justice Department for NBC, he heard from one source that Wray thinks this will be better for the FBI, that there's a chance Trump will attack the FBI less if he steps away. Some might say that's naive, but that sort of fits a pattern of Wray trying to keep a low profile, not getting in public fights with people. And we'll see. The real danger here, and the main thing I want to talk about, is I talked to a half dozen current former FBI officials. They are vastly more worried about Kash Patel as FBI director than Pam Bondi as the attorney general at the DOJ. That it is the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. He's got a very conspiratorial worldview. They question his competence also in terms of just fighting crime and protecting the country. So they see him as one of the most dangerous cabinet picks that Trump has made.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, we say this about Pete Hegseth all the time about the DOD being the most important bureaucracy as far as the large bureaucracy, as far as America's national security. As Mike Barnicle said on Way Too Early, this is the premier law enforcement agency in the world. And so you put somebody up there who's not prepared to do it, even putting aside the fact he says he's going to shut down the FBI building on day one and he's going to arrest journalists. I mean, it's hard to just say, oh, well, let's put that to the side, that he said he's going to go out and hunt down journalists, right? Even with that to the side, he's ill-equipped, like Hegseth, like Gabbard, to run these massive agencies. Let's bring in right now NBC News and intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian, also congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post, Jackie Alamoni. So tell me, Ken, why did he quit? Why did he announce his resignation instead of staying in there and saying, I've got a 10-year term. If you're going to fire me, you're going to have to fire me.
Yeah, Joe, you laid out the stark choice that was in front of Chris Wray. As soon as Donald Trump announced that Kash Patel was his pick, without commenting on the fate of the current FBI director, Wray knew that essentially he was either going to have to force Trump to fire him or find some graceful way to bow out. And at the end of the day, and they wrestled over this, I'm told, at the end of the day, they came down on the side that it would be more traumatic and painful for the FBI and worse for the country if Wray did what you suggested and forced Donald Trump to fire him. Because, look, for example, Charles Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, issued a tendentious letter a few days ago accusing Wray of all manner of crimes and sins, essentially saying that the FBI was a disaster under his tenure, and made charges like the FBI sat on bribery allegations against Joe and Hunter Biden, which has been completely debunked. But it's one thing for Charles Grassley to say things like that. It would be another thing for Donald Trump to do it as president in, say, a letter made public throughout the world announcing why he was firing Chris Wray. That's the kind of thing they were concerned about. Now, as you said, and as David explained, there are a lot of people out there who think that this is a strategic mistake, and it's really in keeping with Chris Wray's profile over the years of trying to avoid these fights, of trying to keep the Bureau out of these partisan battles. But the result of that has been the Republicans have relentlessly pummeled the FBI for 7 years when Wray is on the Hill and other times made baseless charges that the FBI has been politicized. And the FBI has done very little to push back against that. And as a result, you have only 40% of Americans, recent polls, have confidence in the FBI, and 23% of Republicans. Now, the FBI believes they couldn't win that fight, that there was no winning in getting up there. And Wray did try to push back occasionally in hearings where he said, at one point he said it was insane to assume that he was biased against Republicans, given that he's a lifelong Republican and was appointed by Donald Trump. But at the end of the day, he decided that staying in and making Donald Trump fire him would really be painful for the workforce, which still many of them have not gotten over the traumatic firing of James Comey in 2017. But what it would have done, as you suggest, it would have underscored to the country that this was yet another norm-shattering moment, that this is the second FBI director that Donald Trump has pushed out short of a 10-year term, really sort of making a mockery of the idea that the FBI director should be independent and should serve independent of presidential cycles, guys.
So, David, Director Wray, as Ken just reminded us, was appointed by Donald Trump in 2017 when they fired Jim Comey. He is a lifelong Republican, was lauded by Donald Trump at the time. The accusation Donald Trump makes and made again in his response to this news yesterday is that Chris Wray is responsible for the weaponization of the FBI. The Justice Department was weaponized. Chief among those accusations is that they exercised a lawful search warrant at Mar-a-Lago to get classified documents that had been hoarded at the beach club after months and months of attempts by the National Archives to politely get them back. So that's the argument for weaponization. Now what you have coming in is explicit weaponization, if it is in fact Kash Patel. No wink and nod, just saying, I'm coming in, I'm loyal to Donald Trump to go after his opponents on Capitol Hill, in the press, go down the line across Washington. So this is a case where the guy who's coming in next, potentially, if he gets confirmed, will actually use that department as a weapon.
Yes, and the 10-year term is a reflection of history. First, this is to get away from J. Edgar Hoover, who for nearly 50 years fed dirt to different presidents, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats, and weaponized the department. So in the 1970s that ended. We've had a good 40, 50-year stretch where that stopped. Kash Patel, I'll go back to his book, Government Gangsters. There's a list, again, of 60 people in an appendix that he says are part of the deep state. They're Republicans. Pat Cipollone, Trump's White House counsel, is part of a deep state plot with Hillary Clinton and Jim Comey. So he is coming in and
I mean, it's just so absurd. It's just so preposterous. And yet you have Christopher Wray backing out to make it easier for him to get in there.
This is the fear, is that it's a very conspiratorial worldview throughout the book. He exaggerates his own achievements and his own experience. And it serves this political messaging that Trump likes to hear. And part of it is performative. Right. Does he really believe it or not? This is sort of how you get ahead in that inner circle. But he is now going to be possibly the head of the most powerful law enforcement agency in this country and has access to tremendous amounts of sort of secrets that Americans have. Again, Hoover abused all that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what surprised me in my recent conversations was much, much more fear about what Kash Patel will do with the FBI than what Pam Bondi will do
So,
with DOJ.
Jackie Alemany, I'm curious if what we just heard here is reflected in the thoughts on Capitol Hill. You've got a number of different nominees, like Pete Hegseth, who he's unqualified. These are just facts, and he's behaved in ways that may disqualify him. And there are just questions in terms of his basic ability to do a job. Then there are nominees or ideas like Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard. These are people who have outwardly engaged or spoken in ways that are dangerous to American democracy. If I've said that right, are Republicans showing that they are aware of this distinction and that they are aware of the dangers at stake?
Yeah, Mika, well, there's actually sort of two tracks of mind going on Capitol Hill right now, according to the number of people I spoke to yesterday after the news of Wray's resignation. One of them being the nominations track going on, but also the fact that this news comes on the tails of the Justice Department Inspector General announcing that the Trump administration had previously used concerning and surreptitious tactics to monitor congressional staffers and to Democratic lawmakers and obtain their communications. That there is very clearly a precedent here for Trump abusing some of the vast powers of surveillance that the Justice Department has, and as Kash Patel has basically clearly stated that he plans on doing. We know that there were 43 congressional staffers whose communications were monitored as a part of investigations into who was leaking potentially to reporters during the Justice Department and the FBI's investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election. And this is something that was top of mind for many of the staffers that I spoke with yesterday who flagged this Inspector General's report. But in terms of the nominations, these things all sort of feed into one another. Kash Patel is someone, as is Tulsi Gabbard, who have kind of flown under the radar and sort of sailed through the process so far as a result of all of the scrutiny that's been on Pete Hegseth, whose nomination for now has been relatively stable. We saw a number of non-committal statements about the candidates meeting with Republican senators throughout the week this week for one-on-one meetings. But right now, other than the usual suspects, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitch McConnell, there is not a lot of opposition to these people. There are some sort of milquetoast concerns, especially about Tulsi Gabbard, but not about Patel for the reasons that we're talking about. So, you know, I talked to a Trump transition official last night who says that they're really not concerned with many of their nominees at the moment and feel like their approach, especially with Hegseth, of fighting his detractors has really been effective.